But now we gotta go back to Ace Attorney, because if we don't, we're gonna be in there all day. That's like half the list. So next we're gonna do Ace Attorney Justice for All. Phoenix Wright 2. The shortest Ace Attorney game, I believe. A lot of people don't really like this game overall. I think it's a good one. I like the game. But this first case is definitely inferior to the first one of Phoenix Wright 1. They do a lot of smart things here. I think that the use of amnesia in order to put Phoenix in this tutorial-like situation is really well done. I like that. I like Maggie Bird as a client. I think that she's a nice recurring character you see a couple more times throughout the franchise, but that's about it. This case doesn't have the benefit of like introducing you to the world of Phoenix Wright like this case does, where you're like overreacting because of how crazy and different the legal system is. You as the player have seen all this already. And also, you don't get to see like the introduction of a character like Larry Butts or like Mia Fey, who like sticks with you throughout the entirety of the game. Maya makes a little cameo, which is neat considering she left after this case, but it's not really enough to like affect the case's placement at all. Another little note that's interesting that shouldn't affect the case's placement at all is that I personally think this is the weakest appearance of Winston Payne in the franchise. I know he's like a weak character in general, but I think he is the least memorable here. You got some simple puzzles to figure out here, like the whole Maggie thing. This case, I guess, technically introduces the concept of presenting people's profiles, but there's nothing special you do with it in this case specifically. It just tells you to do it for the sake of what you have to do later in the game. What this ultimately boils down to is, do you like Richard Wellington as a villain or not? And I don't have any strong thoughts or feelings about him. I think he's fine. The banana things is funny. He's a funny villain. I don't really hate him, like neither as a villain nor as a character. He's humorous, he does his job fine, but I don't really like look forward to watching people play through this case in the same way that I do watching them play through this one. It's kind of exciting just on the basis of, oh, it's a new game, it's a new experience, new music is everywhere, that's all cool, but I don't think there's enough here that really makes this special. Like, Maggie's cool, you get to see Maggie for the first time, you don't really get much of her, you get a lot more of her in like Phoenix Wright 3-3, and you also get a lot more of her, surprisingly, in Edgeworth 1-1. I think that her personality shines through a lot better in those cases. You don't even, like, she doesn't even tell you about the whole Goddess of Misfortune thing until at the very end, after the case is over. It is cool how she's like this case-specific like tutorial character who sits next to you like a Maya, and you also get like the first inklings of Gumshoe's crush on her, which is also kind of cute, but there really isn't anything special about this case. Like, whenever I'm watching someone play through this case, I'm just like, oh, I just wish they would like get through it already to get on with the meat and potatoes of the game, you know? But it serves its purpose. I think this is another C-tier case, like meh. You could argue that it could be up here, like because of the introduction of Maggie Bird. Some of the Justice for All music leaves its first impressions here in this case. You get to see glimpses of Maya, glimpses of Gumshoe, and attributes of their characters that you haven't explored before, like Gumshoe's crush on Maggie. You get a sort of prologue to the next case here because of what like Maya talks with Phoenix at the end. But again, I really don't think that that gives this case specifically any special points. I think that if anything, it just makes the future cases that involve these characters seem so much better in comparison. So, meh. And speaking of future cases that are better in comparison, the next one, Phoenix Wright 2-2. This is technically a flashback case because this case happens before this case, but no one thinks of it that way like they do about like the Dual Destiny cases. I have a lot of good things to say about this case. I think Dr. Gray is a great introduction to the case. Being able to like talk to the culprit and make it look like he's gonna be your client before the case actually starts, before he dies, before things get going, is actually really cool. I really like that. Like, in retrospect, I actually really like Dr. Gray a lot. I think it's a great segue for Phoenix to like meet up with Maya again, to go to her hometown rather. You get a lot, and I mean a lot of the like spirit channeling stuff in this case. And like I was talking about, like when I was first talking about it here in Phoenix Wright 1-2, I think that's a good thing. This like spirit channeling stuff being crazy, I think is one of the things that makes Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney as good as it is. Spoiler alert, that's why I think like the Grace Ace Attorney Chronicles, for example, is a little weaker, but we'll get to that when we get to it. This case introduces Pearl. Pearl is a great character. This case introduces Morgan Fay, which despite being ousted as an accomplice in this case, becomes an overarching villain that instigates the events of the climax of what up to that point had been the like struggles of the entire series. She instigates 3-5, and that's a big deal that we get our first sightings of her, like first dealings with her in this case. I think Mia is also really well used here. How Mia has Cyclops. Oh my god, we gotta talk about Cyclops. This case introduces Cyclops, one of the best mechanics in Ace Attorney, and specifically it's really good in this first trilogy. I think that when it comes back in Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice, it's way weaker on account of the fact of being stupid easy to figure out. Maybe that's just experience. Maybe I just got better at playing the games, but they were just like so much harder in Phoenix Wright 2 and 3, and I think that was a good thing. I really liked having to investigate and like find evidence and whatnot before I could break Cyclops on Mia, on Eenie Miney, which by the way, great villain. There's so much to talk about here. There's so much to talk about. Let's try to like tackle these things one at a time. Pearl, great first impression. It's just very likable. It's very easy to make kid characters like that hateable. And Pearl was just great. You just loved her start to finish. All the way from this case, all the way to like 6-5. I loved Pearl the whole time. I love the Magatama. Even the tutorial of the Magatama, you can fail because it is possible to go into that Magatama tutorial without having all the evidence you need. And it's just like a great example of showing, hey, you may need to stop, look elsewhere. I think that was like great. It's just such a little thing. Being able to go into the tutorial of the mechanic before you can complete it. On paper, it's just such a little thing, but I think it plays into teaching the player how to go about figuring things out in this game so well. I just love it. And that's all characters. That's not even like talking about the murder itself. It is very easy for a player playing through this case for the first time to think, oh, crap, it really was Maya. She was possessed and really did kill someone. Like, holy crap. Phoenix really has some balls doing what he does in this case. I don't know if I would have done that. If I was the best attorney in the world, I don't know if I could pull off what Phoenix does in this case. Oh my god, now I'm thinking about the trial. I forgot. This case introduces Franziska von Karma. Recurring character, one of the main characters for the Edgeworth games. Franziska is a great character. I love how she grows throughout the course of this game. I think it's like a great character arc. Don't think it's as strong as Edgeworth, but hey, it's really hard to be as strong as Edgeworth in a number of different like categories. She also doesn't overstay her welcome. Despite being the main prosecutor of the game, you only go against Franziska in 2 cases, which is crazy to think about because she just seems like this prominent character. Like when you look at like the freaking game on your PS4 and you see like the cover card, it shows like Edgeworth, Franziska, Godot, and man, you get so little of Franziska compared to Edgeworth and Godot, which I think works. Technically, I do think she is the weakest of those 3 characters, but that ain't saying nothing. Those are 3 strong characters. I love how this is like the first case Franziska's in. We haven't even like talked about the case itself yet. This case has some really tricky contradictions in it. This is like some of the earliest and some of the best instances of you presenting crap and you're like, I don't know how that proves it wrong. And then Phoenix explains it. Phoenix has the large cranium in this case. That's a smart man. And when he says, Pearl, please, I really need you to channel Mia. And you're like, wow, is Phoenix really still that much of an amateur that he needs Mia? And then like Maya's like, what are you doing? And Phoenix is like, now Pearl won't have to see the trial. And you're like, that's the big brain. Phoenix is so great in this case. I love it. This case starts as like maybe the most hopeless situation for your client ever. Like even more than this case. And may I remind you, she's confessing immediately in this case. So it's just so much good all around. Just seeing Mia keep a secret to Phoenix as this sort of like dimension to her character. As soon as you see that Mia is keeping a secret for you, all of a sudden that makes Mia just so much more interesting. And the way the case evolves as you go. It is a short case in comparison to some of the other ones, at least. Don't get me wrong, this case does have a couple days to it. But not only is Morgan a great mastermind, but I loved Eenie Miney as well. She was very fun to talk with. She was very fun to cyclock. It was very fun to talk with on the investigation, to ask questions to. Lovable character, lovable villain as well. Not only do you feel for her when her motivations come out and you see like why she did it, but also the reveal that she was actually her sister who like got her own face done with surgery is just so, that's great writing. I love that twist. I love that twist to death. It's hard to find things about this case to dislike. Most people don't like Director Hottie because they think he's a creep. I think he's funny. Like, don't get me wrong, he makes me uncomfortable. The way he's like scratching himself makes me feel this like itchy sensation that like, I don't know how they did that, but like no other character has ever made me feel like that. That was weird, and that's good. You can do that, that crap is good. One of the weakest points is, again, the unfortunate fact that Lotta Hart is a witness in this case. But you know what? She makes this case worse to a way lesser degree than she makes this case worse. I really like how Lotta and you have to bang the door down together, and you're there when she takes the pictures. I think that she is integrated into the earlier stages of the case really well, and she's not here nearly as long either. I don't think she overstays her welcome. This is probably the best utilization of Lotta Hart in the whole franchise. And thank God, because she's my least favorite witness by far. I like how you bust the door down together. Probably what I would think is the weakest part of this case is how, even though this case sees Morgan Fay, a really big antagonist, apprehended for being an accomplice to murder, you don't actually confront her. You don't actually put her on the stand or anything like that. Or if you do, I don't remember doing it. It's been a while, like a couple years, but I'm pretty sure you don't, right? Right? Please don't call me stupid in the comments if you do. But honestly, I do think this case is phenomenal and near flawless. I would even say that this case has fewer flaws than this case or even this case. The only reason this case doesn't get higher is because this case doesn't have like those really powerful, really high octane moments. The investigation is a lot more low-key, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that this case is really good. I really have like almost nothing to complain about this case. It just isn't as impactful or powerful as like one of these cases. Depending on how much you think that defines a case's quality, you could maybe put it like down in this tier or even up in this tier, like depending on how you view that. But to me, I think this is like an S tier case. This is phenomenal case. Love going through it. Love watching other people go through it. We may bump it down depending on how the rest of the list looks as we go, like I've said before. But overall, like, I just really like that case. This case has so much good. It does so much good. So much good. But then, okay, here we go. So, I think the first thing that I should clarify is that I am a Turnabout Big Top defender. I am! Like, generally speaking, I don't think this case is bad. It's not bad. Stop saying it's bad. It's not bad. If you want to say Mo the Clown is annoying, you're correct. He's supposed to be annoying. If you want to say Trillo or Ben, if you want to say Ben is like kind of cringe, he's supposed to be. It's a comedy act. That's the whole point. I think that what most people get hung up on this case, and so I'm just going to address it right now, is the whole they like Regina even though she's 16 thing. I do not think it's a big deal. This is a Japanese game. Regina is legal in Japan. In all seriousness, the localization team would have just made Regina 18 so that people wouldn't feel this way were it not for the fact that that would F up continuity. And they were smart to do that because Regina did make an appearance in a future game, in Miles Edgeworth 2 too. So for the sake of like consistency and continuity, they didn't change it, but for all intents and purposes, you are not supposed to think it is creepy. She is supposed to be perceived as someone legal, so I do not think it is creepy. I think it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Apollo Justice is feeling fine. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the case. Max Galactica is an asshole, and I think that that's great. It works in the case's favor. Yes, you're supposed to be defending him, and yes, he's like super, what's the word, conceited, but you also immediately see him at a point of weakness of like Billy Bob Jones when he realizes he's in prison and begs you to defend him. For me, it just works. It makes him not hateable like later when everyone is talking about how they hate him. You just see it as like a big meme, and I think it's fine. It's fine. I like Regina Berry as a character. I think that her function here is great. I really like how she's like ignorant and how she grows throughout this case. At the end, she comes to realize some of the more harsh realities of the world. I don't think the circus music is annoying. I don't. I like the very big circus theme. So a lot of the things that people don't like about this case, I either don't mind or I actually like myself. But that doesn't mean that I have nothing bad to say about this case at all. I don't like the investigations just in general. Walking around, finding Ben's doll because he's just stupid and for some like I guess he's a method actor and just like can't deal without it. I do think Trillo works as a meme. I do think it's pretty funny. But what I also don't think doing the investigations here is very fun. Probably the best part about this case's investigations is like talking to Franziska and getting glimpses of like how Phoenix feels about how Edgeworth chose death, which by the way is kind of like ridiculous, but whatever. Questioning Mo the Clown, questioning Ben and whatnot, I don't think any of that's very fun. The monkey was freaking annoying. I don't like monkeys, man. Like, stole my shit, ran off with it, that little son of... I don't like him. I don't like him. I do think that the actual trials are a lot more enjoyable than the investigations. This is, for better or worse, the last time you go up against Franziska in the game. It's clear that losing to you rattled her, even though she tries to hide it, and really see it affect her. Like at the end of this case, when you win again, I think that this case does a lot of good for Franziska. I think the weakest character here is definitely Acro. I get what they were going for, right? Making him the villain. This person who doesn't seem to have any evil in his heart whatsoever turns out to be really effed up and like wants to kill this girl because she accidentally caused someone's death due to a misunderstanding. I get it. I get what they were going for here, but I didn't feel bad for him at all. And he just didn't seem like the kind of person who would hold a grudge like that against Regina. When you put it on paper, the motivation makes perfect sense, right? But when you actually talk to him and see what kind of person he is, he just doesn't seem like someone who would kill a little girl over a reason like that. Like, you'd think that he would be more sensible and less hateful than that. If he was the kind of person who would do something like that, you'd think it would be reflected more in his personality, or like when he's talking about his brother or anything like that. I didn't feel enough malice from Acro to buy the fact that he would do this super malicious shit to kill Regina. I didn't buy it. And speaking of things I didn't buy, the cape falling on the bust is something that I try to defend it because I don't think it makes as little sense as a lot of other people think that it does, but there's no denying that it's bullshit. Like, let's be honest, it's bullshit. Like, come on. I want to defend it because I do feel like that could happen. I do feel like it makes sense. But so much of the case's misconceptions ride on that, and that wasn't even something Acro planned. It was just something that Mo not only happened to see, but also interpreted the way he did just because it was too dark, even though there was like a light right there. I try to defend this case because I really don't think it's that bad. It's not an outright bad case. It's not. It's just not, man. But there's no way it's getting any higher than C+. Like, it's somewhere in here. Do I want to put it in D? I don't know. So let's compare the good and the bad, right? I like Regina. I think Regina is probably the strongest point of this case. I like Max Galactica as well. I think that he is also a good client. He's a fun client. Like, let's be real. Mo the Clown is so not funny that he's funny. And I think that's exactly what they wanted it to be. I think how I feel about Ben and Trillo is exactly how the developers wanted me to feel. I don't like Ben. I don't. So that's like kind of a minus. But Trillo is like a little shit, and he's supposed to be, right? I don't like the monkey, but fortunately that's not a big part of the case. I like Franziska. Don't like the investigations. I like the trials. They're not like higher tier trials. They're okay. Like the trials are like mid. They're like, eh. Like Franziska, do not like Acro as the villain. Man, it's like I either like most of the characters or feel they do what they're supposed to do well. But then on the other hand, none of the gameplay is very fun, right? How do I rank something like that? Because it's a visual novel. It's mostly about the characters in the story. But the story mostly ties into like Acro and his motivations and whatnot, which I don't like. It's also the least relevant case in the game. Were it not for like Franziska's development, this might be a skippable case. I guess you also get like the Edgeworth bits of backstory and lore, and Phoenix explaining some of that in here too. Is there really more good than bad just because I like the characters? But like Acro is just such a big part of the case. You don't see him until like, you don't see him the first day though, which I guess is good. But on the other hand, like the gameplay, like, I feel like Regina really is the strongest point of the case. I don't think it's average. I don't think it makes it into average, but I also don't think there's necessarily more bad than good, because you spend a lot of time talking to like characters and laughing or going like, what? Like when Trillo like sings his song and you're like, what the f did he just say, man? That's wild. I'm putting it in meh. I don't think it's a slog. I kind of like sort of just made up this description as like an alternate reason to put something in the tier, but I guess I do think it's meh. It's average. I wouldn't say there's more good than bad, but I also wouldn't say there's more bad than good. It's meh. You know, if only Trillo really was the villain, this would be a better case. I'm putting it above 2-1, but I don't know if I want to put it above or below the Danganronpa 1 climax. I'm not sure if this is a comparison anyone's ever made before, but I'm glad to be the first. I am going to put it above the Danganronpa 1 climax just because I do think this case is much more of a slog. This case has some good moments too. Like, yeah, that looks right. Yeah, that looks right. That feels right, you know? I know how, like, adamant I was when we first started talking about this case, about how much a defender I am of it. It sounded like I was gonna put it up here, but I just can't, man. Maybe it's just because I don't think any of these cases, like, I don't think this case is bad. This is not a bad case. Maybe it's because I like all of these. Like, everything that's not an F, I like. I do. So maybe that's why I feel like I'm a defender of this case and most people don't like it. I would play through this case again. I would. Happily. Would not skip. Would not skip. Even if the case is debatably skippable, would not skip. It's not skippable. Let's be real, none of the cases so far are skippable. And speaking of things you do not want to skip, this case. This case was wild. This case was as much of an emotional roller coaster as the Robo Justice chase. And this case kept it up a lot longer. This might be the most adrenaline I've ever felt playing Ace Attorney. There's a lot to unpack here. I like the use of Will Powers as like a way to introduce us to what's going on. I like that. I like Will Powers. I like him a lot more as a side character here than I did as a client. Unfortunately, this case does have a lot of heart. I don't know why so many cases, you just decided to taint so many cases with a lot of heart. But it does not take this case very long to get going. You see Shelly the Killer, and you take a look at this man, and you know something is wrong. Something feels off. You are unsettled immediately. Maybe it's the stitching down the face. That'll do that to a man. And then you find out Maya's been kidnapped, and it's just like, holy crap. Immediately. Shit hits the fan immediately. You feel as desperate as Phoenix in this case. You don't know what's going on? This isn't like a situation like Danganronpa where like crap's effed from the get-go. You don't really have the means to help her, and you really do feel like you're at the mercy of this lunatic. And so you have to meet with your client, Matt Ungard, who I think is great. Everything this man does is great. His persona at the beginning where he's just like this absolutely stupid guy who's like can't do or decide anything himself. and his like mad evil persona later, when he's like, "Hello, Mr. Lawyer." That crap is so great. What a great villain. I can't believe, like, Phoenix Wright made, like, your client... Well, he's not the killer. He hired the killer. I guess technically that is an important distinction. But Matt Ungard is great, and this case is really good at making you feel conflicting feelings. You gotta do what you're doing in order to help Maya, but also, you really don't want to help out this man the more and more you learn about him. Not only did he hire an assassin to do this crap, but there is also the thing where he like, drove Adrian Andrews' mentor to suicide, because he just likes effing around like that. This case is great at making you feel torn, and that is just such a unique experience. Like, what a great case. Man, I'm jumping all over the place. Let's try and be a little more focused. So, let's talk about the witnesses. You know how I feel about Lotta Hart. I hate Lotta Hart, and unfortunately, I don't think that she's as tolerable here as she is in 2-2, but fortunately she is not around nearly as much as she is in 1-4, or at least she doesn't feel like it, because this case is really long, so that might not be an apt comparison. This case also has the return of Wendy Oldbag, which I like a lot more than Lotta Hart. I like Wendy Oldbag as that comic relief witness a lot more than Lotta Hart. Her alien blaster gag is funny. Pearl, you also get a lot of Pearl in this case, and due to the fact that Maya is kidnapped, you also get to play as Maya for a very brief period of time, which I think is really, really cool. But the most noteworthy witness is, of course, Adrian Andrews, who like comes off as this really like overconfident, independent, even almost jerk of a manager, but then you learn all of her secrets, right, over the course of this case, and you just feel so bad for her. And by the time you're done with this case, she's just such a likable character, and she didn't really make a real positive first impression on me. So to have all that turned around is just a testament to just how well this case utilizes its new characters. Because like all three of the main ones, Adrian Andrews, Matt Ungard, The Killer, all great. So great that every time Adrian or The Killer showed up later in the franchise, it was a treat because of how well this case established them. And Matt Ungard was also great all the way through. We also have to talk about Edgeworth because, like, Franziska gets shot, which, by the way, crazy revelation. Like, that's wild. But then you have to, like, go against Edgeworth, like, as her replacement. And not only do you have, like, this sort of, like, confrontation between Phoenix and Edgeworth, where Edgeworth is showing, like, the sort of stuff that he's figured out during his time away, but also seeing how Phoenix reacts to that. It's just so interesting. And it's crazy how right it feels to go against Edgeworth in this case, when he hasn't been there all game. If you're looking at this on paper, it almost seems like he was pulled out of nowhere just so that they could have Franziska get shot, right? Because you haven't even seen Edgeworth all game. And like, yes, you have talked about him specifically in this case, but that wasn't all that much, you know? So given how little we've really like gotten of Edgeworth, even heard of Edgeworth in this game, it's like so strange how well they make him work in this case. Of course, anyone who's played the first game gets mad hyped, but even like without that, I feel like just in a vacuum, just this game, it still works. This is also the first time we sort of see Edgeworth established as a character that tackles like crime on a more global scale. He talks about Shelly the Killer and how he's like this international criminal. It feels so much bigger, and like Edgeworth brings with him this sense of scale that you've just not felt in Ace Attorney before. It really makes this case feel like a big deal, even beyond Phoenix's personal stakes that he has in it because Maya's been kidnapped. It's just an emotional roller coaster all the way through, and you never, to the very end, until you finally get D Killer to go against Matt Ungard himself, all the way from start to finish, you're unsure if you're really doing what you're supposed to be doing. It keeps you invested, and it keeps you feeling conflicted all the way through. This case has a grip on you, and it will not let go until you're done with it. And the victim turning out to be a jerk just like Matt also added a lot to it, because there's just so much going on in the background, like history between Matt and like backstory with Adrian. There's just so much, and it all ties into like the complete package that this case presents so well. And we also, of course, have to talk about the crazy ending where you get a radio of Shelly the Killer on the witness stand, and you walk this very thin tightrope where you have to like press him and like learn stuff and contradict him without doing it too much to make him just kill Maya on the spot. It's wild. I do feel like the fact that that tightrope gets pushed a little farther than it should is probably the weakest point of this case, because if I'm Shelly the Killer there, I'm like, nope, shoot Maya immediately. This man's clearly like up to some tomfoolery, something smelly in Denmark, if you will. But the fact that that is like the weakest point of this case is a testament to how great it is overall. It's the first case that Phoenix loses, technically. It's not a loss, which also ties into Franziska and her arc and how she thinks that winning on paper is everything. And then Phoenix like loses and she points at him and laughs. But then Phoenix sort of like shows her that winning isn't everything and that there's more to it than just getting the verdict that you're being paid to get. And even though Franziska isn't there for like almost this whole case, it even wraps up her arc perfectly, because then you have the scene where Edgeworth meets her at the airport and she has to go out and find herself, and you finally get to see her lower her walls of her heart a little and cry in front of Edgeworth. It's just great. Like, how did they do that? How did they switch out Franziska for someone who hadn't even been in this game up to that point and just have it work perfectly for not only both characters, but the game and the isolated singular case itself? How'd they do that? How'd they do that? Is there anything else I'm forgetting? I guess you definitely have to mention the choice that Phoenix has to make, where he has to choose if he wants to save Maya and like get Adrian declared guilty and ruin her life, or save Adrian and have Maya basically executed. That's a tough effing decision. I think almost everyone that I've ever met has chosen to protect Adrian and say, I'm sorry, Maya, which is crazy because Adrian is a brand new character. We've been Maya for like 2 full games at this point. So I think that is a testament to just how well this game really makes the player want to pursue the truth, like Phoenix. It's just another element that makes the conflicting feelings you have in this case just like sting so much more, because it goes against not only everything that Phoenix has believed in, it also goes against how the game has taught you to play in order to progress ever since like the very first trial of the first game. And so I do think it's an unparalleled masterpiece. I can't dock it just for having a lot of heart, because she doesn't overstay her welcome. The whole finding her camera thing is dumb, but I'm not gonna knock it points for that, because this case is overall really unparalleled in what it does. Not gonna dock it for walking the tightrope between Shelly the Killer when he's on the radio, because the tension you feel and you're just like, I'm one step away from just messing up and having Maya shot on the spot. It really feels that way the whole time you're cross-examining and talking to him. It doesn't let up for even a moment, so I can't dock it for that either. This is the first time that you ever defend a guilty client. I'm not sure Phoenix Wright ever does that again. I know Edgeworth does, because he like defends Simon Keyes in Edgeworth 2-2. Well, not officially, not as a lawyer, but you're basically protecting him, and then he turns out to be the villain of the whole game. But I don't think we in court defend anyone else like that in Ace Attorney other than Magnus McGilded, the man himself. So the game has balls for that, and like I said, it is the first time where like Phoenix technically loses. I don't think Phoenix loses again until he goes against Apollo Justice in 6-5. So it's just a very unique experience, just on top of being good, well written, emotionally investing, like you get invested with the characters, and it's like a hype train start to finish. Just on top of all of that, it's just so unique, and it does something so different. I think I will even put it above Gant's case. I didn't want to, just because of the little minor things like Lotta Heart, and like how I do feel like we push Shelly a little more on the radio than was realistic. But even though I have like literally no flaws whatsoever with Gant's case, I do feel like this case was an even better experience. So I am gonna put it there. Also, minor thing, anytime Edgeworth and Wendy Oldbag are involved in the same case, it's always super funny. I love that dynamic because it makes Edgeworth so mad. That crap is so funny. I just forgot to mention that, but I had to, because it's just another great thing about this case. Before I move on, I also forgot you have to feed a cat in this case, and that cat is the reason you figure out who freaking Shelly the Killer's client is. It's ever great. The cat helps you solve the case. Best kitty. Best cat. Let's go. Alright, I am back from vacation. I am fully refreshed, been thinking a lot about this tier list. I'm here to continue it, rank some more cases. One thing I did forget to say about 2-4 real quick is that this case probably has one of the most memorable instances of, like, I talked about how this case, I believe, where you had to, like, take the Kyoko, like, so strange and then use it to refute something earlier in the statement. This case had a bullshit moment like that too. I'll never forget. It was the scene where you were talking about what was in the guitar case, and the evidence that was used to show what was in it was a picture that did not even exist at the time. I got so many game overs because I didn't even realize that Phoenix was talking about the costume that was in the picture, not the picture itself. That screwed me up. Probably one of my most memorable moments of me getting stuck on a case out of any case on this list. It's not going to affect its ranking at all. I just thought that was very funny and just wanted to mention it before we actually move on. The vast majority of what we have to get through is still Ace Attorney, so I think we're going to finish off the original Phoenix Wright trilogy and do Trials and Tribulations next. And the first case from this game, Trials and Tribulations 3-1, is a very interesting case to talk about. This is the first case where you get to play as Mia. I think this is the only game where you get to play as Mia in general, and it's a very interesting premise to start off and like bring you into the game with. Right off the bat, this case is interesting because as someone who has been playing through the first couple games, starting off with a tutorial case playing as Mia would probably at this point be the best way that you could like introduce a potential new player to the franchise. Phoenix had sort of exhausted his potential for tutorializing. I do think that starting with a flashback case of Mia was just in general a better place to start and like do a tutorial, make a tutorial for the third game in the series than doing something with Phoenix again. And I think that something that we, like modern players, don't have to worry about is the fact that back in the like DS days, this game had the potential to be someone's first Ace Attorney game. In the modern days where most people are just playing the ports or emulating them in order, that's not likely gonna happen very much. And I think that for the time frame it was released in, this game did a great job of being able to ease someone into this world without having to know about what happened in the first two games. I think this is just as much of a great first case for this game in terms of being the third game in the series, as well as it is for a standalone game for someone who may have just like bought this one on the DS and like none of the rest. I think it's a nice touch. I don't think it'll really affect its ranking, but I do think that the devs deserve props for that. So going forward, we're going to talk about this case as though you were playing it as a player who had already played through the first two games. And let me tell you, this case is crazy. Defending Phoenix really shakes things up. Just goes to show every main character in this franchise who is not named Apollo Justice has to be defended at some point or other in time. So right off the bat, I think I can say that this game probably made the best first impression on me in the music category. I think that Trials and Tribulations has the best music out of any of the like original three Ace Attorney games, and it really hits you with it right off the bat. Being in court as Mia, it feels a lot more serious than this case did. Defending Phoenix, it being Mia's first case. Even Winston Payne, I feel like, is much better utilized here than he ever is in the series outside of this case. This is definitely Winston Payne's best case. Like, for sure. This is before he, like, loses his confidence and becomes the tutorial guy, which is ironic because he is the tutorial guy here, too. But I think this is Winston Payne's best showing. And this case, I think, also gives us our best Mia moments that we ever get. You could say that, like, Mia moments in, like, the other case you play as her in 3-4 are, like, equally as good or better. That's true, I think. But, like, either that case or this case is such good utilization of Mia. I think that the original three Ace Attorney games get a lot of complaints from people who think that Mia is overutilized and think that Phoenix does not have much room or opportunity to grow as a person because Mia holds his hand too much throughout the entirety of the first trilogy. And I think having her as a character who, like, remains in the story is great when you use her in flashback cases like this. It's very easy in games and narratives like this for a flashback case or just a flashback scene in general to feel like it's not very important because you already know the outcome for the most part. You've played as Phoenix for 2 games now, you know he gets off the hook. But they do a great job of really making you feel like Phoenix is in danger. You have to defend this simp who clearly doesn't really know what's at stake. And the game just does a great job of making you feel like the stakes are really high. Does it make you feel like the stakes are as high as they are in this case? I don't know about that one. Just because like you're so nervous like going into this game. You as a player, this is probably your first Ace Attorney game. You're probably gonna be like, oh, I'm in court. And you're probably gonna like sit up and be all like, oh darn, this is a pretty stiff atmosphere. I don't know about all that. And while you do have like the experience once you get to this point to like not really feel like that, you definitely feel like you're at risk of losing. This case definitely has the strongest first villain out of any case from the original trilogy. I don't think anyone will ever debate you on that. In fact, I think that I would go as far to say that Dahlia Hawthorne is the best Ace Attorney villain, period. She's this lingering presence that influences the course of the entire game, even though you catch her right off the bat in this first case, which happened like years and years ago. She still manages to be this presence that lingers and threatens you and threatens the events of the game, and somehow manages to still cause and instigate unfortunate events even after her execution. Or well, we'll get to that later, but even after you find her out and win this case against her in this case. I love the utilization of Dahlia, and this case has a lot of great moments. I actually do like how Phoenix simps for her in this case. I do think that it adds a lot to the case. In general, I think that cases like this where love is like a very strong motivation for characters to lie, or it's one of the stronger reasons and motivations for characters to do what they do, and I feel like this case uses the concept of love very well. The moment where Phoenix just swallows the necklace, I will never forget that. That crap was freaking great, and just seeing Mia go against Dahlia in general is just a really good feeling. You don't know at this point in time the history of Dahlia and Mia and Diego Armando, but you do feel some of that tension, and the game does set up some of the things that you learn about them later, initially here in this case. It does a lot. It does a lot for a first case. It does way more than this case or this case. I love Dahlia as a villain, and I love her use in this case. Phoenix as a client is great. Mia as like a playable character in general is great, but also using her first case as a tutorial is really great. Like I said, best appearance of Winston Payne in this series. I also think it is really funny when he loses his hair like that. Cold Killer X is also in general just pretty funny. Dahlia poisoned Phoenix's cold medication. But where would I rank it though? It's hard for me to point out negatives about this case because I don't think this case has anything bad about it, like at all. It does what it does really well, and it's basically all really enjoyable. There's just nothing crazy about it that gets it like up here. So I'm thinking it's either an A or A+. Is there anything about this case I don't like? I mean, Payne and the judge simp for Dahlia too, but I think that's more funny than anything. No investigation segments because it is a tutorial case. I just remembered Grossberg is in this case too. I completely forgot about that. Like, it didn't even cross my mind. He's just kind of there. I don't like or dislike the ongoing hemorrhoids joke. It's just whatever. I like Dahlia. Is this Dahlia's like best appearance though? Definitely not. Like, it's gotta be this, right? I do think I prefer this case over this case. I think Dahlia is a better villain than Red White. Having Phoenix as a client is very interesting because you already know who Phoenix turns into and becomes, and it's just so interesting seeing him at this earlier stage of life where he's just so into this girl who you, as the player, realize is a freaking murderer trying to kill him. There's not as much to this case as there is in this case, but the investigation parts of this case aren't that super great anyway, and I feel like this is just like, it's more compact, but it's like all good things, right? I would say it's amazing and very enjoyable that a tutorial case can do something like this. And it's not like Danganronpa 1, right? Where Danganronpa 1 has like build up establishment of Monokuma's game, like an investigation. I don't think comparing DR1 to something like 3-1 is a very fair comparison, because DR1 has so much more that it does. For as little as 3-1 had to do, it did it all great enough to make it into A+. I don't really know what my qualifications would be for A tier. Like I said, we're gonna have to see how the rest of the list turns out. Might bump this case up here, might bump this case down there. I guess we'll just see. Next is 3-2. A very interesting case for a number of reasons. Let's list them off. For number 1, this is the first domestic case that you do ever. Danganronpa obviously has no domestic cases, and Phoenix Wright has, like, Ace Attorney in general has very few of them. They're like all criminal murder cases. And this one does turn into that eventually. But for the first half of the case, real solid chunk of the case, you're investigating a theft. Which is interesting because the stakes don't feel as high, but because of just how crazy the characters and circumstances are, you get really invested really easily. Bringing back Adrian Andrews for the earlier parts of this case do it a great service. We never see her again after this, which is sad to say out loud, but I do think that was really great utilization of that character. It really ties it all in initially, and also gives the Phase, the Maya side of things, like a personal stake in it, because it's like one of their relics that is the target of this theft and whatnot. And of course, like, Adrian had this whole scene where she like breaks it and everything. I know I'm jumping around a bit. I'm not as familiar with Trials and Tribulations as I am with the first two, just because I've seen fewer Let's Plays of it. But this case does like everything right, man. Luke Atme, by all rights, should be effing annoying and hateable, but he manages to be hysterical, and I don't know how they did that. Ron Delight is really, like, he's so unique, man. There ain't any other character like Ron Delight. I've not seen one in like all of fiction that's like Ron Delight. It's just a real interesting dynamic, especially when you factor in the mask to mask stuff. Let me tell you, this whole case, my mind was going crazy with everyone saying they are mask to mask and that they aren't mask to... No, everyone claims they were mask to mask. Sometimes there was one point where I thought I was mask to mask. This case was absolutely so funny to figuring out who was mask to mask and who was where and why. I absolutely loved the, like, who is mask to mask sleuthing. It was just so, it was so funny. It was so great. I love it. I mentioned I loved Adrian. I don't think that Ron Delight's wife, Desiree, I actually just had to look it up because I forgot her name. I don't think Desiree Delight is that strong of a side character. Some people really like her. Maybe they just have a thing for women like that. But I personally think, like, Adrian is a lot stronger. Luke Atme, who comes out as the villain, is a lot stronger. So I didn't really, like, have that much fun interacting with Desiree. But we get some Larry Butts in this case. I like Larry. Whenever Larry comes out, you know you're in for a good time because some stupid shit's about to happen. And I love it when that happens in these games. So I really enjoyed the general mental game of trying to figure out who was masked to mask and who stole the urn. And so for that reason, even though it wasn't like a higher, like, stakes raised situation murder case for the first half of the case, I really enjoyed the first theft half of this case. And before we get too much into that, we also have to take a step back and realize this case was the first appearance of Godot, my favorite Ace Attorney character. I love Godot, man. What a strong first impression. When the judge asks, "Are you ready?" and he says, "Your Honor, are you ready?" And you're like, oh shit, this dude's the real deal. A lot of credit, again, to the music of this game, because Godot's theme, like, Godot's my favorite Ace Attorney character. Godot's theme, probably my favorite Ace Attorney track. It's just so impactful, instantaneous atmosphere Godot plus his theme creates. It just sucks you in immediately. It just, he takes over and completely steals the show of any scene that he's in. No other character feels like Godot. Like I mentioned how Ron Delight isn't a character that, like, I have ever really seen before in fiction. Godot is on another level. There will never be anyone else like Godot. And I'm gushing over it, and you know what? This is all just based on the initial first impressions and impact he makes as a character and as a prosecutor. Going against this dude is effing scary, because he always seems so confident and in control. Practically nothing phases this dude. You could argue that some of his mannerisms and arguments aren't very lawyery, and I would say that's a fair argument, but to me as a player, that just made him all the more intimidating. He felt like he was in control of the case start to finish. He felt like he had experience I didn't have, and it was just such a unique experience just playing through this case. Like, no other case before it had felt like this. And this is all just because I was going against Godot, right? Not even taking into account the specifics of the case. Godot was making me doubt my own arguments. I have heard people say his arguments are trash, and I'm not really sure I would even contest that on a like lawyery level. But as far as I'm concerned, his demeanor, he belongs in the courtroom, as far as I'm concerned. And you also start to feel the first hints and undertones of his sadness and like tragedy as a character. I've never seen a character who feels so deep as a character so quickly. It took me no time at all to realize that Godot had this depth to him that we were going to explore throughout the rest of the game. Just for being Godot's first appearance, just by itself, this case is undeniably getting in the top half of the list. But like I said, it's more than that. I think Ron DeLite is funny. I think Luke Atme is funny. I always think Larry is funny. Desiree, whatever. Like, we've mentioned him. I love Adrian Andrews. She is so precious in this case, man. Seeing her, like, get so freaked out over, like, breaking the urn and whatnot and trying to put it back together. It's just great, man. I just love it. It's just made me go, oh, Adrian, no. And like I said, I love the Mask to Mask sleuthing. Who is Mask to Mask? Where was Mask to Mask? How could he do what he did? If anything, I almost feel like the second half of the case, when we got to the actual murder, wasn't nearly as strong or memorable. Like, who is the victim? Like, I know victims aren't really, like, as big a thing in Ace Attorney as they are in Danganronpa, but it was just some dude in a bank who was, like, blackmailing. Oh yeah, there was so much blackmail in this case, man. Someone was blackmailing Ron DeLite. The blackmailer was being blackmailed by Luke Atme or something like that. It was crazy. I do remember that this case gave us like the outline of Luke Atme being there and like being the murderer in like a flashback or whatever. I think they did that a bit too soon. Like I said, I always hate it when cases show you the player who the killer is too early. This case isn't nearly as bad as an offender as something like this case or like this case, but I still think that they did that a little too early. But I give like the biggest props to Luke Atme's plan of confessing to being Mask to Mask so that he could like steal the urn so he wouldn't be accused of murder. I thought that was great. I thought that was really interesting. And also that just added further to the whole who is Mask to Mask mystery. I loved it. And overall with this case, I just have one of the best times that I've ever had playing Ace Attorney. The Godot, the Mask to Mask chase, Ron DeLite and Luke Atme both claiming they were Mask to Mask. It gets at the top of S for now. Does it actually? I almost feel like this case is better. I do love like the build up and events for this case so much, man. I am gonna put it behind Danganronpa 1-2. I feel like, yeah, this is like a better spot for it. There were some investigations here that weren't really that high of highs, you know? Don't get me wrong, the investigations had some good points as well. Like talking to Ron in the detention center was always funny. Talking to Larry was funny. Adrian Andrews was probably the funnest part of the investigation. But I think that Luke Atme shines the most in the courtroom. I don't think he was as fun to talk to during the investigation segments, and also I wasn't really like the biggest fan of Desiree. She was like whatever. Well, let me tell you, chasing Mask to Mask, phenomenal. Factual information. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a couple months, but we are back to our case tier list. And yes, I said a couple months. It's been quite a while since I've like looked at this, but I really want to get back to it, finish this list. I don't know why it's taken me so long. It's because it takes me like an hour to get through one game on this list, so it just takes me forever to record, get my thoughts together. And a lot of that is because of something I'm about to discuss, because we are on Trials and Tribulations Case 3, Recipe for Turnabout, and that is that I really don't remember a lot of these cases. I am very familiar with, like, All Danganronpa. I'm very familiar with Phoenix Wright 1. Phoenix Wright 2 a little bit, pretty darn familiar. Trials and Tribulations, I only think I ever experienced twice. I think I played through it once, and then I watched, like, one Let's Play of it. So I actually had to go back and refamiliarize myself with, like, this case in particular, because this, I feel like, is the least memorable case to me of Trials and Tribulations, which is crazy because it's the maid case, right? Like, this is the case where you can see Maya, Mia, Maggie Bird in maid outfits, which of course gives it top quality of the line points towards being in the upper half of the tier list. But let's think about it. So, very interesting opening for sure. You don't know what's going on with Mr. Tigre yet. You see yourself losing to pain. You don't have the context. You're going like, what the heck is happening, bro? How do we lose a case like this? How is this even physically possible? Phoenix Wright, you lose your undefeated record. Well, I guess you're not undefeated because of this case, but you lose to Winston Payne. We can't allow this. But then the game wastes no time in telling you that there's an imposter among us. And I think that that's a very interesting dynamic. I don't know why anyone would want to impersonate Phoenix Wright, but hey, that's one of the main aspects of this case. Also, Maggie Bird comes back. I talked about how I like Maggie in this case. I think that this case is probably Maggie's best appearance. I think she has 3 cases overall. This one, and wherever Miles Edgeworth 1 is, this one. And this is like the only case she's in that isn't a tutorial introductory case, unless she like makes like a cameo in like one of the later cases in the Edgeworth games or something. So Maggie actually has a lot of time to shine here. This is where her relationship with Gumshoe, or not like relationship, potential relationship with Gumshoe is more so fully explored. I really like it. The Maggie Gumshoe thing is really cute, giving her the weenies. It's hilarious, even to say out loud. This case has a lot of very interesting characters. I think that it has one of the most distinct victims in Ace Attorney. Mr. Glenn L. definitely stands out as the victim with the Vegeta Scouter. Lisa Basil is also a very fun, interesting side character. I think that the characters in this case are almost all great. I don't like Mr. Armstrong. That crap kind of freaked me out. That man was not only kidnapping Maya, but he was also trying to steal my crap while he was doing it. Did not like that man. Fortunately, he did commit a crime. Hopefully, we'll never have to see him again. He did some great work, though, not gonna lie. Got Maggie, Mia, Maya, Maggie, all of the girls in the maid outfits. Like, thank you for your work, Mr. Armstrong. Viola Cadaverini, crazy one-off character. She is like alluded to in this case. You don't actually see her, but she is mentioned by name in this case. But this is the only case where you actually see her, and I feel like that's a character that could like be 100% utilized in the future. If we ever see Ace Attorney 7, seeing an adult Viola for a chapter, I think would be amazing. I would love that. I was so interested in Viola whenever she was on screen, like what she was doing. I didn't know if she was the one who did it. I mean, we all saw Phoenix Wright did it in the opening cutscene, which was crazy to think about. Kind of a spoiler in a way, a la this, but done much better, because obviously Phoenix Wright is not the sort of person to slip Glen Elk poison. But Viola didn't do it. Viola actually ended up having a really good backstory. I actually found like her dynamic with El Tigre, whatever his name is, and her history as like the granddaughter of the mafia boss to actually be very interesting. Probably one of the highlights in the chapter. And also, hot controversial take I'm about to drop. I think Victor Kudo is a hilarious, great side character. I know like no one likes that guy, like at all, but I love him. I thought the nose thing, it was off-putting at first, I'm not gonna lie, but I quickly found that crap to be hilarious. I don't know what it is about him, man. Every time he was on screen, probably something to do with how his appearance paired very well with his song, but I ended up very much liking Victor Kudo. And at the end of the first day of the trial, when that man handed you his slip, he was talking about the vase breaking, and he said, "I'm sorry." I actually felt bad for the man. Man's dealing with trash, overpriced food every day just because he has a maid fetish. I understand, bro. I feel for all the old dudes out there. It sucks being old. I'm not looking forward to it myself. But anyway, unpopular opinion, I really liked Victor Kudo. Let's talk about El Tigre as a villain. Definitely great humor potential here. I really liked how, like, the judge would, like, go under his table, how Phoenix would go under his table, like, in the courtroom. That crap was hilarious. So the characters are, for the most part, all bangers in this case. Loved Viola, ironically loved Victor. Maggie returning is great. Lisa Besso, interesting side character, not there for very long, but interesting nonetheless. A whole bunch of pluses just all around. The case itself, though, I feel like the more I thought about it, this case doesn't have nearly as much to it as I remember it having. I remember there being more to this, but there's really not. So the first twist was that Glenn Elg was actually taking ear medication, not ingested or it was applied topologically, not ingested, which is like the means that would have been used to poison him. I thought that was a good twist. The bigger twist at the end, where El Tigre's plan just came apart when he suddenly realized that Glenn Elg could indeed pay off his debt to him, and he had to kill him because of that, because he needed the CD, I thought was really well done. I found that to be really interesting, really great dynamic. And I think that the way that this all stemmed from a debt that he had to the Cadaverini family was very interesting in general. I thought that Viola's connection through that and how she got like attached to him and thought that he liked her was very interesting. But nah, man, that man was just terrified. Lots of great stuff here. Ends with a bang as well, because Phoenix Wright does one of the biggest bluffs of his career. Outright lies to the witness in order to get him to like talk about some stuff that he shouldn't know but actually does. I thought that was a great end to the case. That's one of the most Phoenix Wright ways that a case could end. So I've talked up this case a lot. Let's talk about what do I not like from this case. I don't like John Armstrong. I do feel like when he was on screen, more creepy than funny. I do think that him having this debt problem and like being a kleptomaniac was a really good touch for his character, though. I thought that that was very interesting, very well done. Definitely added this like dynamic to him that I was not expecting. It was really cool how Phoenix got his Magatama stolen and we had to deal with not having that for a while. That was cool. Don't think it really mattered too much in the long run, though, but it did spook me for a moment, not gonna lie. Also, even though this is the second out of the 3 cases in this game where you go against Godot doesn't really get much time to shine in this case. I don't really remember any big Godot moments from this case, and this is a game where like Godot is like the most memorable thing about it, so maybe that's why this is the least memorable case of this whole game to me. Godot does have his one moment where like there's ketchup on the apron and he doesn't see it because he can't see red, which sort of sets up one of the bigger twists at the end of the game. So that was like a little good Godot moment for this case, but overall Godot does not get much time to shine. I'm not really sure if I should dock the case that much for it though, because this case more so focuses on a lot of side one-off characters. Like we get a lot of Maggie Bird, like Gumshoe's great, like this is where you actually get to start seeing him display his affection for her and show how much he cares. But like you get a lot of Viola, you get like Viola, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, it sounds Italian, man. I don't know what to tell you, I'm not Italian. Get a lot of El Tigre, John Armstrong, like Glenn Bessel. I feel like Glenn Elg has a lot more backstory and interesting like things to him than most victims. His like gambling addiction was really cool. Like go gamble, kids. No, I meant like it's like a really interesting take to his character. I really actually enjoyed learning more about Glenn Elg in the investigation than I did for most victims. Like the random banker from this case, definitely not as fun to learn about as Glenn Elg. If you look at like most of the Ace Attorney cases, like Russell Berry, Dr. Gray, I think Glenn Elg had a lot more to discover about him, a lot more personal characteristics of the character factored into the murder than a lot of like these other victims did. So that's a big plus. Whenever Ace Attorney makes you like really care about a victim instead of the victim just being like a plot device to get the case to happen, I think it's pretty good. I like it. So I think that this case is very comparable to this case, but perhaps to a lesser degree. I did talk when I talked about this case how even though like there are more flaws with this case than this case is lower than this case just because it doesn't have as many standout moments. This is a case that I also don't think has any big flaws, but there's also way fewer standout moments. Like I said, it is a very forgettable case to me. Potentially even the most forgettable case of the entire Phoenix Wright trilogy. Which is crazy to say, but now that I'm thinking about it, I think this is the most forgettable case of like the original 3 Ace Attorney games. All the main characters, Phoenix, Maya, Godot, Mia, none of them really have any big moments in this case. It feels like a filler case, but it's good filler. I enjoyed it. Just because it's not like some crazy masterpiece or something that gives a lot to like one of the main characters doesn't mean that it's bad, right? It's mostly good, almost all good. Don't like John Armstrong, but other than that, it's like mostly all good. It just doesn't really live up to this standard. A lot of good humor, probably gonna put it into either A or A+ somewhere. Part of me wants to put it above these two, but another part of me wants to put it below them as well, because I feel like the case is like more enjoyable to play than these two, but this case gives way less to the characters and way less to the story than either of these. Also, I think these two cases both have higher peaks than this case. Learning about Phoenix's relationship with Dahlia, much better than anything in this case. Crazy tension you see in this case, even if like sometimes the investigation slogs a little, I still think is overall, or maybe not overall, but it definitely peaks higher, even if it also valleys lower. So honestly, you could put this case anywhere that you might want to in order of like these two right here. But even if it's more consistently good, I think I'm gonna put it below in A tier just because it doesn't accomplish as much for the game overall. This feels like one of the most compact cases in the franchise. Were it not for that little bit of Gordeau foreshadowing, I almost want to say this case could potentially be completely cut and the game could be fine. I'm glad it wasn't, because this definitely felt like a game that needed 5 entire cases, considering that 2 of them didn't have investigation segments. But even though it didn't add much to like a grander, more overall arcing plot, I do think it was real solid. And hey, you don't even have to do that sometimes. These cases were all more important to the overarching plot. And as you'll see when we get like into Great Ace Attorney Chronicles later, I also don't think that just having one story that each case combined is a part of, as opposed to like being more compact stories within themselves, doesn't always necessarily equal a better case overall. I'm not sure how well I'm articulating my thoughts on this, but I do think it is a real solid case. I would say it's very enjoyable, not sure if I'd call it amazing. So I think this is a good spot for it, like a good standard to set for A tier. One of the main reasons that I've been putting off like coming back to this tier list for so long is because I just kept putting off having to refamiliarize myself with this case, because I feel like there was so many details about it that I forgot, because I mostly just remembered the characters and not much else. More so for this case than any other case in the original Ace Attorney trilogy. This case, for example, I remember a lot more. So this case has a very mysterious opening. It opens with Phoenix in the hospital looking over files from a case that Mia did in the past, which is already a pretty great start. I was invested immediately. Much stronger start than this case. You could even argue the strongest opening to a case in Trials and Tribulations so far. It's another flashback case, and getting to play as Mia again felt really, really cool, because I did think that that would just be something exclusive to this game's tutorial, but no, they made those sprites, they're gonna use them. So this case has a lot of interesting aspects to it right off the bat. You see Diego Armando, the man himself, and anyone with a brain can recognize that this is Godot, right? Which makes it interesting from a whole other dynamic. You may or may not remember that Diego Armando was the name of the person who got poisoned in this case by the time you get around to this case, but just the fact that he is Godot means that even if you miss that detail, there's still this fascination to like learn what happened to this Diego Armando. Your client is by far the least likable in the game, debatably the whole series, depending on how you feel about Matt Ungard, and potentially Max Galactico, or Larry Butts if you have crap taste. Terry Fowles, I didn't like. He simped a lot for Dahlia, which is understandable, but this man was just creepy, man. Even if he didn't do it, I didn't feel much reason to want to defend this man. Just interacting with that guy. Do you remember the animation of him chewing on his ball and chain? I feel like one of his eyes was shadowed out. That crap was unnerving. So I didn't like Terry Fowles. I feel like his best moment is what most people would probably say is his best moment at the end when he kills himself, which is an interesting thing to say about the best moment for a character. But this is all just like the setup to the case, right? This is a case with a focus. First of all, Miles Edgeworth as a kid, as an amateur is really, really cool. I might bring up this case when we talk about, what case is it? Edgeworth 1-4, when Edgeworth is like supposed to get his first real case or something. I actually don't remember if this comes before or after this case. I think this comes after. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, young Edgeworth being in this case is really cool, especially when you remember when they were talking about all throughout Ace Attorney 1, how Edgeworth is undefeated up to this point, and so it's in the back of your mind that that means that Mia must lose this case. And aside from this, which is a very special, unique situation, you have never lost a case so far in Ace Attorney, so it just makes you feel going forward, it's just such an interesting feeling. Knowing that Edgeworth has never lost a case and you're going against Edgeworth in the past, which means you're going to lose. Aside from the fact that Edgeworth is just great in general, this was before Edgeworth developed his own mannerisms and his own style, before he had like the finger, back when he like imitated Von Karma's like finger wag and whatnot. That was really good attention to detail, how he was still sort of mimicking his teacher, hadn't really found himself as a prosecutor yet. This case isn't about Edgeworth's backstory at all, and it still manages to do a lot for him as a character, at least in my eyes. Some people might not think that sort of thing is all that important. I think it's really, really cool. But when you get into the case itself and you see that Dahlia is involved, my God, man, I freaked out. I guess I should have known that Dahlia was involved. She was using a different name at first, kind of threw me off. I don't really remember what I was feeling at the time, but most of the like pluses of this case are related to the characters. Like, you're playing as Mia, you're going against Edgeworth, and you have Godot back when he was Diego as your Maya, given you are playing Mia. I also think that Diego and Mia's dynamic is very cute. This is the only time you ever get to see them interact, and I really enjoyed seeing the few interactions of theirs that they had. I feel like they would have been a great couple. Mia Fey gone too soon, R.I.P. Made this entire game happen, I guess, since like Godot woke up, wanted revenge on Phoenix because he made some leaps in logic. But anyway, the case itself, like kidnapping, shooting on the bridge, like falling into the river, it was all for money. Again, Dahlia, it's all for just money. I don't know, man. Is it too much to expect something of a better motive? I guess she got more devious as time went on. She was more devious in this case. She was definitely more devious in this case. One moment I remember so fondly, or not fondly, definitely not fondly, so clearly from this case, is when they were talking about how she couldn't have jumped from the bridge, or from the other side of the bridge. It took me forever to figure out that it was because like there was a rocky like surface below it, and she would have like hit the rocks if she jumped there instead of going into the water. It took me forever to figure that out. I try to point out these moments if I remember them being in a case, like a moment that was really difficult for me to figure out. This case had one of those moments when we were talking about her jumping off and like she couldn't because there was a rocky plateau down there. It's not as crazy as this case, how I was talking about how this case, what was in the stupid guitar case, and it was like a photo of the costume, and I didn't want to do that because like the photo didn't exist, and I thought they would be talking about the photo, not what's in the photo. I game overed so much there on this case. This case had a moment like that, but this case mostly exists to provide more solidified backstory for Dahlia beyond just this case sets up how her relationship, or not relationship, how her history with Mia Fey started, like the sorts of person she is, and filled in a lot of the blanks necessary for this case to exist in the capacity that it did. So even though this is a case that is largely in part carried like by the character quality here, Mia, Edgeworth, Diego, I think Dahlia is a great character too. So even though Terry is a dud, it's pretty much an all-star cast of a case. But the contents of the case itself aren't really anything to write home about. Again, it is mostly just something that is used to establish backstory for Dahlia, for Diego leading up to this case. So the content wasn't really there. Aside from that one part I got stuck on and Terry killing himself at the end, there wasn't really any moments that stand out in my memory too much. I really think it's probably an average case. Gameplay, specifics of the case, below average as far as Ace Attorney goes. But that character quality, man, playing as Mia against Edgeworth is such a great experience. It's gonna be placed either above these two or below these two, or perhaps in between these two, somewhere in here. It's really hard for me to do that though, because anytime Dahlia is involved, I immediately want to put it up here just because it's so interesting and so fun to play. I feel so involved when Dahlia is involved. Oh man, I really don't know. Is it here or is it here? I don't know, man. The case didn't really have like any big twists until the very end. I feel like I'd rather play it as a case than these two, but that also might just be because I've experienced it way less. I feel like that shouldn't be something I'm factoring in. I think I am gonna put it in good, fairly decent. I think I'm gonna do that. Ultimately, what it comes down to is asking myself, would I rather play through this case again than one of these two cases? Would I rather watch someone play through this case for the first time as opposed to these two cases? The answer is yes. Now, which case did I enjoy playing through the most for the first time? That is also this case. So I think that when you take all those things into consideration, even though I don't think that like the actual contents of the case, how it went down, the mysteries you have to solve are like not as good as this or even this, the characters make it a more enjoyable experience to play through. I just liked it more, would enjoy going back to it more, would enjoy introducing someone to it more. So I think ultimately that's where it goes. The characters make it good. Even if like the case itself, not so much, the characters make it interesting, enjoyable to solve and whatnot. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you can tell that Trials and Tribulations is a good game, because its worst case is good / fairly decent, because you already know this case is the GOAT. This case is the best case we've ranked so far. I can go ahead, put it there, no questions asked. I remember when we were at the climax of this case and Godot started bleeding and he said, "The color red doesn't exist in my world. These must be my tears." And I had a flashback to when he told Mia that the only time a lawyer can cry is when it's all over. I said out loud, this is really good. This case is phenomenal from every angle. God, would I be here for like 2 hours if I started talking about everything good with this case? If you've played Ace Attorney, you know why this case is the GOAT. This is the greatest of all time. Let's see if I can. Oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna try my best. We're gonna rapid fire through some points, okay? Point number 1, Maya and Pearl get involved immediately. Like, this is the first time Pearl is really involved all game. She was sort of involved in this case, but this is the first time that Pearl is like a big deal in terms of what's going on all game. So having Maya and Pearl both directly involved from the very beginning, like flashback to what I said about this case, right? Like how good the spirit channeling and the mystic element is for the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney universe. This case capitalizes on that as much as humanly possible. I also think the intro cutscene with the Tsuchishito, I think it's called, is really, really cool. The fact that it even flashes back to this case wasn't even in the same game, and it flashed back to it. I thought that was really cool, and it really demonstrated how everything that had happened up to this point was all going to come together. Everyone was involved in this case. Miles Edgeworth came back. He finally like took on the mantle of a defense attorney like he had originally planned to back when he was a child, wanting to take after his father. Franziska comes back in this case, has a showdown with Edgeworth as the prosecution. Even Larry Butts is in this case. You all know how much I love Larry Butts. The victim, oh my god. Figuring out that it's Maya's mom, I'm skipping all over the place. But Maya's mom has been like a thing, like a huge point of relevance ever since case 1-2. Like ever since the very beginning, we've been wondering what's going on with the master of the Karayan channeling technique. I just realized I spelled phenomenal wrong. Please don't like roast me in the comments. And serviceable too, bro, what is wrong with me? You don't get a lot of Ace Attorney cases where you're like on the scene before the murder happens. There's not many Ace Attorney cases that have build up like Danganronpa's do. I think like this was the last time that I can remember an Ace Attorney case really having that kind of build up. Not necessarily to like the action happening, but to the murder itself. Right? This case had a lot of build up, but like the murder itself wasn't really a big wow moment. This case really built up to someone's death in a really suspenseful way. Seeing Iris, you don't even know it's Iris at the time. Seeing what you think is Dahlia at that shrine, bro, that crap made me stand up. I didn't know what was going on. Seeing her in the present day just freaked me the heck out. I wanted to know what was up. This was like the most invested I've been in Ace Attorney, even more than this. I was immediately, as soon as I saw Dahlia, I don't know what it is about Dahlia, man. Maybe she's just freaking hot. I don't even know. But as soon as I saw her, I'm like, I got to know what's going on, man. When Phoenix confronts her, seeing those Cyclocks, so many memorable moments. I already told y'all how I don't really have that much familiarity with Trials and Tribulations. My God, I still remember this case so vividly, like so much of it. Even so much of the details, going back and forth, Bikini, you'd think that a character like Bikini would be like forgettable, and maybe it's just because of the case that she found herself in, but I thought Bikini was pretty great. Going like back and forth because of her back and that bridge thing and like where Larry was, there was just so much going on in this case. This was like the most complicated an Ace Attorney case had been up to this point, and man, I was all for it. I loved keeping track of who was where and what was going on. You got to play as Edgeworth, that was cool. You got to give Edgeworth the Magatama, that was really cool. My God, like I could gush about this case for forever, man. I'm having to just give y'all the bullet points version because otherwise I'd be here for hours. Bro, I'm not even half done. When Phoenix finally gets back to the investigation after you got to play as Edgeworth in court and you basically get to investigate with Franziska, that's really cool. Also, I think it's really cool that in the beginning of the trial, you as Edgeworth are defending Iris and Phoenix asked him to do that. Despite what Dahlia had done before, we didn't know that Iris and Dahlia were separate at this point in time, right? Phoenix didn't know what was going on and he still wanted to defend her, so much so that he asked Edgeworth to do it in his stead after he took his tumble off the bridge, which was absolutely crazy in and of itself. This man Edgeworth flying in from Germany or wherever to come be here for the finale of Ace Attorney. Larry's drawing was hysterical. I loved it. It was so freaking funny. Pearl, misinterpreting the note. Pearl being the instigator in this case. Let's just talk about Pearl for a moment. Maybe we should take this one character at a time. Let's talk about Pearl. The fact that Pearl instigates this entire conflict. Well, she doesn't technically. I guess Morgan is technically the one behind it who instigates. By the way, payoff from last game. Crazy. Morgan instigates this, but Pearl is the one who sets it all into motion. All this tragedy happens because of Pearl, And the game doesn't even have enough time to really focus on Pearl once she realizes what all she's done. Like, once the trial is over, you don't really get to, like, focus in on her and see how being a part of this experience has really affected her, because there's so much jam-packed into this case. We don't even see Pearl again until freaking, what, 5-6? No, 5-5. We see her in 5-5. We don't see Pearl again for a very, very long time after this case. And so we never really get to see her recover from the effects of this case. And I just think that that is so interesting, like how she was just in the background, and you never really suspect little Pearl of being the cause of so many big problems. And like, I guess part of me is thinking, now that I'm thinking about it, there must have been a better way that Maya's mom, when working together with Godot, of all people, could have found a better way to prevent what had happened here. But I guess, like, that's also, like, part of the plot. Like, Godot's pride was getting in the way because the one close to Pearl, and Maya by extension, was Phoenix, and he didn't want to go to Phoenix because he blamed Phoenix for what had happened to Mia in the first game. It just all ties together really well. Like you think you find plot holes, but when you think about the character motivations and where their mindsets was at, it all really makes sense. It just all comes together. Everything about this case is flawless. The investigation, all super fun. The court sessions, all super fun. Tons of characters get spotlight in this case, and it doesn't drag for a single moment. Every single one of them is interesting. Even the one-off character, Bikini, is always like saying relevant stuff when she's talking. There's no filler here. It's a roller coaster start to finish. You think this case is over when you finally like realize that Dahlia was the one trying to kill Maya, and you realize that Dahlia was in a way the one who was killed again, which is like symbolic because then you exorcise her on the stand. I don't really know how that happened, but it was cool. And you think it's over, but then the game still doesn't let up. Okay, let's take a step back for a moment there. I feel like the mysteries of this case were really interesting. Throwing the corpse over the bridge on a wire? Absolutely wild, bro. Some may call that bullshit. I don't think that's bullshit. I think that the cape falling on the thing is something that could happen, but still significantly more bullshit than what happened here with like throwing the rope across the bridge on the wire. You never, even when playing this case, stop to think that it was a contrived writing decision to have lightning strike the bridge. That never crosses your mind, because by the time that you realize just how important that was, you've already like been too busy paying attention to everything else, because this case does such a great job of investing you. The snowmobiles going back and forth, who was where and why, the status of Elise Donham's injuries and how like she fell after death. There's just so many memorable details here that were fun to figure out in court, you know? And of course the ending, when you realize that it was Godot that killed her. What a crazy ending. Am I right? When Godot is finally found out and he gives his speech at the end about how he doesn't even know why he did it. I'm not bleeding, these must be my tears. And when you point at him and you see like the shadow of Mia behind Phoenix, everything about this case is an unparalleled masterpiece. It is. I felt bad for Godot. By the way, can I just mention how hard I ship Phoenix and Iris? To add on to everything that happens in this case, at the end of this trial, when Iris tells Phoenix that he and Dahlia only ever met twice, and you realize exactly what has been going on. Oh my goodness, man. I don't know how long Iris is gonna be in prison for, but I hope she comes back in Phoenix Wright 7. It's not gonna happen. I know it's not, but I want them to be together. I feel like it's so perfect. Speaking of perfect, this case is, perfect, if you couldn't tell. Amazing, start to finish. No gripes about the characters, no gripes about the investigation, no gripes about the trials. It's a long case, too. You're getting a lot of content, and it's all great. Like all of it, man. Even when I'm going back and looking through this case again, I still feel like I learned more about the specifics of where everyone was and what was going on. Like when you're talking to Iris in the chamber after she put on more locks, but then you realize after you beat the game that that was Maya channeling Iris. You realize that conversation she had with Phoenix where she tells him about how Dahlia hated her guts, or hated his guts, hated Phoenix's guts. And that hurts, but then you realize later, nah, that was just Dahlia talking trash. Going through this case a second time gives its own unique experience and perspective on things. I enjoy going through cases a second time. I enjoy watching people go through cases for the first time when I have already played through them. I don't think there's another case that gives genuinely two different experiences during your first time and your second time currently ranked like this case does. And I think that's great. Now, Raincoat has some of these cases, just to like jump ahead a little. When we get to Raincoat, Raincoat has some cases like that. And we'll talk about that when we get there. Because I really want to talk about Raincoat, but there's only one Raincoat game. So I'm trying to put it off for at least a little while. But the point I'm trying to make is that this case is 100% worth replaying even after you've experienced it. I can't think of a single thing wrong with this case. This case defines what is the best. I don't think I'm gonna put anything else on this list above it, but we'll see. Some things may come close. I don't think this case comes close. This case could have its own tier, honestly. Man, Godot is such a tragic character too. I hope this man didn't get executed. I know we never see him again, but I really hope he didn't. I don't know if it's been confirmed or not, but oh my god, I just loved Godot. My heart was breaking during the end when he was talking like, what a great character. What a great character. Favorite Ace Attorney character by far. So that does it for the Ace Attorney trilogy. As you can see, these games are pretty dang good. We have a lot of cases in the upper half, not many in the lower half. And we still have more Ace Attorney games to go than everything else. What are we gonna do next? I think we're gonna do